So we'll just like be on the edge somewhere. So, awesome. All right, well I'll get back out then.
Good. I got given a pack. I don't know. I'm new apparently. Should I sit anywhere?
That's okay.
Hey, boss. Sorry, Sean. Thanks so much for you need to escape, so you should...
Why don't we just sit there? Oh, wait, they want to film on the side. Oh, okay.
I don't know if I can fit underneath there. Thank you. Thank you. We probably should go back. Thank you.
You may need to steer the camera, but we're gonna run off my watch. T minus. So I'll check these through.
Well, hello everyone and welcome to today's public meeting. It's so good to see you all today.
Yeah, it really is wonderful to see everyone here. We're expecting to have heaps of people show up today, so please do sit towards the front and shuffle in maybe a bit to make it easy for people to grab a seat if they come in a bit late.
My name is Zoe and I'm one of the student leaders in the Sydney Uni Evangelical
and I work alongside the Sydney Uni EU.
We're really excited to welcome you today because the EU is putting on a 2-week event that we are calling Meet Jesus.
During these weeks, we're making a big public invitation to everyone of every faith background, believers and skeptics alike, to come and investigate the Jesus who we find in the Bible.
So a warm welcome to you again if you are investigating Christianity, whether a friend has brought you along or if you came here by yourself. We are so glad that you are here. We are also thrilled today to be able to offer interpretive services for anyone who might prefer to listen to our talk today in Mandarin or Cantonese. All you need to do is grab out your smartphone and some headphones, take a photo of this slide and get the app and enter in this code. So give me a moment to do that now.
Alright, now if you're someone who's checking out faith or you're not sure where you're at with Jesus, we have a special gift to say thanks for coming and to encourage you to investigate further. Hopefully you got one of those welcome packs at the door, but if not, raise your hand and one of our ushers will make sure that you get one.
And we're really excited to invite you to join us in the hour after our talk for a free lunch where you can continue this conversation and also meet others in our community.
Okay. But let's kick things off with an icebreaker activity. Now, so this is going to be a true or false trivia game. So everyone participating, so come around, stand up, up you get. Up you get, come on. Alright, so I'm going to make a series of statements. Now, if you think my statement is true, I want you to put your hands on your head. If you think my statement's false, put them on your hips. Thank you, Zoe. And if you can't make up your mind in time, you are out. If you're wrong or you're out, go on, sit down, and let the right people keep on going. Let's see how they go. Now, the theme of the trivia quiz is the Roman Empire. When was the last time you guys thought about that? Let's start with a couple of practice questions. Alright, so first up. Jesus lived in the time of Roman rule. Heads for true, tails for false. Alright, you guys can at least hear me. Let's try another one. There was an emperor known as Gluteus Maximus. Yep, you found it. Okay, alright. Let's get to it. So, your time starts now. The earliest evidence attests to human presence in the area of Rome dating back 20,000 years. What? Well, go back. Let's go to that one. Whoop, next. Woo. Julius Caesar was Julius Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March, 15th of March, 44 AD. Alright, I'm seeing a lot of people go for true, but the answer was false. It was 44 BC. Alright, let's go to our next question. What do we got? There was an official office in ancient Roman religion known as the Pontifex Maximus. True or false? What do we got? A lot of people saying true. Do you trust me after last time? I don't know. The answer is true. In fact, they were the chief high priest who had the most important position in ancient Roman religion. Alright, next up. The Roman Empire was officially divided into the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire in 395 AD after the death of Emperor Theodosius I. Have you made your answers? Answer is true. Next one. Alright. The Pax Romana, a period of relative peace and stability in the Roman Empire, lasted approximately 200 years, from the reign of Emperor Augustus to that of Emperor Marcus Aurelius. True or false? True or false? What are you feeling? Oh, there choice logic. Let's see how it goes. All right. The answer is true. He's trying to second guess me. I see this. Next question. Scroll through this one. Roman aqueducts were primarily constructed for military purposes, such as transporting water to fortresses. I reckon true or false? True or false? True or false? Well, they're splitting the difference. One of them is going to fall. The answer is false. And Glen Scrivener's down. They're primarily for civil purposes, like water to cities. Next question. Roman religious practices were strictly monotheistic, and the worship of multiple gods was strictly prohibited. True or false? Stan? That's a great question. The answer's false. The answer's false. Let's move to the next one after that clarifying question. Ancient Roman society was matriarchal, not patriarchal. Yeah, I'm seeing some consensus. That was false. Next one. The legion was the largest military unit in the Roman army. True or false? True or false? Let's see. The answer's true. Do we have another one? No, we don't. All right. Congratulations. All right, you guys are going to see, especially those people who know a lot about the Roman Empire. Were you thinking about it this morning? Now, so Jesus lived, died, and rose in first century Israel when it was under Roman occupation. And it would be a fair question to ask at the time whether following Jesus was safe. But we might ask the same question today, which is why we're so glad to be exploring it with our speaker today, Glen Scrivener. Glen is a minister based in the UK and the director of a ministry called Speak Life. Let's make him feel welcome.
You have a bunch of spoken word videos on your YouTube channel. So when did you get into poetry?
I've always kind of been into poetry, but I spent the first half of my life in Australia, and then I went to the UK. But I think the first poem I can remember is I was 14 years old, and I just went to England, and I was being made fun of for my accent, which is weird now because I sound like a Pom. I know I sound like a Pom now. I sound like a convict to all the English as well, so it's the worst of all. But, so I wrote a poem aged 14 entitled Yogurt Vitamin Scones. Would you like to hear it? Yeah?
Yeah,
So it's not long, don't worry. It's not like an epic poem. Yogurt Vitamin Scones. Yogurt Vitamin Scones. The ways of saying these words are obeying rules of expanding your cultural standing. You're making a case for social debates by cruelly denouncing the ways of pronouncing yogurt, vitamins, scones. That's it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. We'll make up our minds about your accent, and we'll hand the show over to you. So
Okay.
take it away.
Thank you very much. That's not why you all came this afternoon. If it was, you'll be very, very disappointed. So, is Jesus safe? If you're here on Tuesday, we thought about the topic, is Jesus good? And now we're thinking about, is Jesus safe? And I'm just trying to find where my John's Gospel is. Here it is. Yeah. Do you have one of these? If you're a guest today, you should be have received one of these, absolutely free. We'll be cracking this open in just a second. And if you are a regular here at the EU, then you can look up John chapter 11 on your phones or on your Bible that you've got with us. But we're going to use this in just a second. And I want to acknowledge what the issue is behind the question. Okay? If you're going to ask the question, is Jesus safe? I guess the issue it's trying to address is Jesus might be dangerous. Christianity might be harmful. Perhaps Christianity has been a force for evil in the world, and I don't want to join something that is evil, that is harmful, that is dangerous. Let's think back to the Roman Empire. Let's think back to the impact that Christianity had on the Roman Empire back in the early centuries AD, or in the Common Era, as people are wont to say these days. It's funny, isn't it, when we don't want to say AD, because you know what AD stands for? Anno Domini, the Latin phrase for in the year of our Lord. who's the Lord, right? Jesus, right? In the year of our Lord, Jesus Christ. And it's so interesting, like, we sort of change the name for this era of history, and we now just call it the common era, but we still date everything since Jesus. Which I think is even more of a victory for Christians, because it's just like, Jesus is for everybody. Like, it's now the era that we live in. We count the number of years since him, since the Lord Jesus. And I would say that Jesus has been a force for immeasurable good in the world in the last 2024 years. Just think of, if we were today, this is not a meeting at the EU, imagine it was a meeting of the Society for Human Progress. And I just asked everybody why they were here and what organisations they were representing as they came to the Society for Human Progress. And one person gets up and says, I belong to the society that invented charity. And I say, well, that's really impressive. Like, you actually run a charity. And they say, no, I don't run a charity. Well, in fact, my organisation runs innumerable charities. But actually, my organisation invented the very idea of charity, the way we've come to understand charity in the modern world, as something that is for the beneficiaries and not as something for the benefactor. Well, that's very interesting. And if I put it to the vote and I said, who thinks that this person and their organisation belongs in the Society for Human Progress? I think we'd all say, aye, right? And they'd be voted in. And then I move along to the next person. I say, what organisation do you belong to? And they said, well, I belong to the organisation that invented hospitals. And I say, well, that's fantastic. You run a hospital. And they say, oh, no. My organisation doesn't just run hospitals, although they do run innumerable hospitals all over the world. But actually, my organisation invented the very notion of hospitals. I mean, the Romans had sick bays where you would return your slave to kind of economic utility. They had sick bays where you would return your soldiers back to military utility, but they didn't have hospitals that existed for the sick as such, whether they're rich or poor, whether they're useful or not useful. And so this person says, I belong to an organisation that invented hospitals. And if I put it to the room and I say, does this person's organisation belong in the Society for Human Progress? All in favour say aye, you'll go aye, right? And then we move along and this person says, I belong to an organisation that actually outlawed pederasty. So in the Roman Empire, and especially among the Greeks, pederasty was usually male elites initiating younger, usually boys, into sexual ways in ways that we would find grotesque, evil, harmful. We would call it abuse. And the members of this organisation absolutely called it abuse and did not call it child love, which is what pederasty means. And so this person gets up and they say, my organisation actually ended pederasty. We say, well, does this person's organisation belong in the Society for Human Progress? And we keep going along the line, and this person's organisation got rid of the gladiatorial games and blood sports. You know, Squid Game was real 2,000 years ago. But this person's organisation ended Squid Game as a reality, and now we can just enjoy it as a Netflix show, right? And who thinks that this person belongs in the Society for Human Progress? And so say all of us, and they get voted in, and along we go. And this person says, what else can we say? This person says, well, we ended the practice of infanticide in the Roman Empire. Absolutely common to kill your offspring if they were disabled, usually. And a predominance of if they were a girl. You would expose the infants on a rubbish dump or drown them in a river or throw them down a well. And infanticide was just business as usual in the Roman Empire. But this person's organisation ended infanticide. Fantastic. Brilliant. Who says that person belongs, or that person's organisation belongs in the Society for Human Progress? I think we would all say absolutely they do. And the next person says, my organisation invented human rights. And the next person says, my organisation invented parliaments. The next person says, my organisation invented universities. And the next person says, my organisation invented the modern scientific method. And the next person says, my organisation ended legal human trafficking and abolished the transatlantic slave trade. And if I ask you whether you vote all these different organisations into the Society for Human Progress, we all vote and say, aye, yay, and amen. And then, of course, you know the punchline. I ask, which organisation do you belong to? And they say, the Church of Jesus Christ, the Church of Jesus Christ, the Church of Jesus Christ, the Church of Jesus Christ. The Church of Jesus Christ, 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 the Church of Jesus Christ. I put it to you that the Church of Jesus Christ is hands down the greatest force for good on planet Earth in history. We have a Q&A session. And that's why I put in provocative statements like that, so that you can push back at me in the Q&A and ask whatever questions you want to ask. Because I'm not saying that Christians don't have blood on their hands. And I'm not saying that sometimes the church has done horrendous evil. I'm saying the church has sometimes done immeasurable evil and great wickedness in the world. But alongside that great wickedness, there has been amazing progress made by Christian people for Christian reasons. So if the question that is on your mind as you come to this afternoon, you think, is Jesus safe? If your question is, maybe Jesus is dangerous. Maybe Christianity is harmful. Maybe the church is a net loss for human society. I want to perhaps invite you to think again about that. Alongside saying that sometimes the church has been some of the worst offenders when it comes to human rights and equality and sexual abuse and all those different things. Usually when people talk to me about the sins of the church, they will tell me about some great crimes, and it is my burden and the pain of my heart to say, you know what, sometimes it's even worse than you think. And I'm able to tell them about other evils that the church has committed, so-called in the name of Jesus. And yet, the song that Jesus has given to us, in the words of the author and speaker John Dixon, the song that Jesus has given to us is so good, even if sometimes the singers have sung off-key. And sometimes the singers have sung very off-key. And it's been a cacophonous mess. But bad singers does not equal a bad song. And what we want to do is kind of introduce you to the original singer of the song. Because Christians get this wrong. This book is very clear about that. And sometimes Christians can be among the worst offenders on planet Earth. And yet our contention is that even when we sing the song badly, the song is still a good song. Is it safe to meet Jesus? It's a complicated thing, actually. One of the complicated things about whether it's safe to meet Jesus is whether or not you want safety to be the transcendent value in your life. Do you want safety to be the number one virtue that rules over all the other virtues? If you do, just a word of warning from Jonathan Haidt. So he wrote a book together with Greg Lukianoff back in, I think it was about 2018, The Coddling of the American Mind. I think it could be kind of the coddling of the UK mind and the coddling of the Australian mind as well. And he in particular was looking at university culture and just questioning whether safety should be the number one virtue. He's not questioning whether safety is a virtue, but he's questioning whether safety is the number one virtue. Here's what he says. Something is going badly wrong for American teenagers, as we can see in the statistics on depression, anxiety, and suicide. Something is going very wrong on many college campuses, as we can see in the rise in efforts to disinvite or shout down visiting speakers, and in changing norms about speech, including a recent tendency to evaluate speech in terms of safety and danger. This new culture of safetyism is bad for students and bad for universities. Safety is good, of course, and keeping others safe from harm is virtuous. But virtues can become vices when carried to extremes. Safetyism refers to a culture or belief system in which safety has become a sacred value, which means that people become unwilling to make trade-offs demanded by other practical and moral concerns. Safety trumps everything else, no matter how unlikely or trivial the potential danger. When children are raised in a culture of safetyism, which teaches them to stay emotionally safe while protecting them from every imaginable danger, it may set up a feedback loop. Kids become more fragile and less resilient, which signals to adults that they need more protection. which then makes them more fragile and less resilient. You see, the vicious circle that can happen. He talks about this concept of fragility and anti-fragility. And he asks the question, emotionally speaking, are humans fragile or are they anti-fragile? And if we start to think that human persons and our emotions are fundamentally fragile, then we will protect ourselves from all sorts of emotional danger, emotional risk. But he makes the case for the fact that human persons and our emotions are not fragile, but in fact anti-fragile. Anti-fragile is an interesting word. It doesn't just mean non-fragile, okay? Like a china plate is fragile, drop it, smash, gone, okay? A Tupperware plate is non-fragile, you drop it and it bounces and it's all okay. But something that is anti-fragile gets better when it comes into contact with impact and resistance. And things that are anti-fragile are things like the human immune system, okay? Our immune systems are not fragile, actually they're anti-fragile. And actually when your kids start picking up the diseases that everybody else has in the primary school, it actually ends up being good for them. And when they're not at school picking up the diseases of everybody else, they become more vulnerable actually. And if you want to shield people from bugs and that kind of thing, in the end, it becomes more fragility, less resilience. Or bones. Bones are another thing that are anti-fragile. Actually, the more you bump your bones and the more they feel impact, the stronger they become. One of the great barriers to deep space exploration is, well, if you're in zero gravity, then your bones don't get any resistance training. And you become weaker and weaker and weaker. You need resistance. You need impact. At times, you need to expose yourself to things that hurt. But that can make you better. And what Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt, these psychologists, say is that the human person is much more like that. We are anti-fragile. And that if safety becomes the number one thing that's guiding our life, you know what happens? Your fears, they don't shrink. You shrink. Your fears get bigger. And then if you shrink back from that fear, you get smaller again, and smaller again, and smaller again. What if we're anti-fragile? And what if we're made for the right kinds of risk? Not foolhardy risk, the right kind of risk. Like the risk of relationship. I was reading some statistics just yesterday about the figures for boys asking out girls going through the floor. And it's a whole other YouTube hole you can fall down about why don't girls ask boys. Like that whole debate, I'm not here for that whole debate, okay? I've been controversial enough this afternoon. But when you, over the years, when you just ask men, have you asked out a woman on a date in the last 12 months? That figure has just been plummeting and plummeting and plummeting and plummeting. And of course, one of the most obvious explanations for that is it's a risky business. Whether it's the guy asking the girl or the girl asking the guy, it's a risky business, isn't it? To put yourself vulnerably before another person and you say, hey, I kind of like you at least enough to have a coffee, can we have a coffee, right? And what about the fear of rejection? Right? But if no one risks, there's no such thing as relationship. That would be a really terrible thing, wouldn't it? And if safety becomes number one in your life and it rules every other goal in your life, you might just find yourself losing love. That would be a tremendous loss, don't you think? Shouldn't love be at the top? Now, you want to entrust yourself to someone who is trustworthy, don't you? You ought not to entrust yourself to somebody who is harmful and dangerous and abusive. If you are in such a relationship, then you should get some distance from that right now. Get some friends who will help you with that right now. Because that is not loving. But if we put love number one in our goals, then I think we'll start to feel like we need to risk at times, won't we? Won't we have to risk in order to do things? And we're in the Meet Jesus series, and we're starting to think about, is it safe to meet Jesus? And I want to tell you that it is intimidating to meet Jesus. I want to tell you that it is a very vulnerable act to meet Jesus. I want to tell you that he might lead you places where initially you don't want to go. But I also want to say that ultimately Jesus can be trusted. He is entirely trustworthy. Do you know Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe from the Chronicles of Narnia? C.S. Lewis tried to put a story to this whole concept of meeting Jesus. And you might know the story. When you go through the wardrobe, you end up in this place called Narnia. Narnia is under a curse. And in cursed Narnia, it's always winter and never Christmas. Okay? It's like January in the UK. It's just a cursed existence. Okay? Everything is magical in the UK, right up until about 3 p.m. on December the 25th. And then you just despair for another 3 months. Okay, that's what life is. With Christmas behind you, January is just like living in the UK is like living in Tupperware, right? Imagine just living in a lunchbox, because you've just got this translucent grey dome over you the whole time. And C.S. Lewis put words to this. He said, like, life without Jesus is a bit like always winter and never Christmas. Always winter and never Christmas. And so these children, they managed to go through the wardrobe into Narnia, and they meet a couple of residents of Narnia, the Beavers, Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. And they start to be introduced to Aslan. We're meeting Jesus, they were meeting Aslan. And as I read this, I warn you, I am going to do the voices. Okay? These are the Chronicles of Narnia. The voices will be done. Okay? And we'll get through it. We'll all be grown-ups about it. Okay? I can wait as long as you can wait. Okay? But in this rendition of the Chronicles of Narnia, the part of Mr. Beaver will be played by Ray Winston, a great Cockney actor who's down a lot of whiskey in his life. So, Mr. Beaver says to the children, "They say Aslan's on the move. Perhaps he's landed already, and no mistake." No, he doesn't say "and no mistake," but that was my cultural appropriation. And now, a very curious thing, as he mentions the name Aslan. None of the children knew who Aslan was any more than you do, but the moment the Beaver had spoken these words, everyone felt quite different. Perhaps it has sometimes happened to you in a dream that someone says something that you don't understand, but in the dream it feels as if it had some enormous meaning, either a terrifying one which turns the whole dream into a nightmare, or else a lovely meaning, too lovely to put into words, which makes the dream so beautiful that you remember it all your life and are always wishing you could get into that dream again. It was like that now. At the name of Aslan, each one of the children felt something jump inside. Edmund felt a sensation of mysterious horror. Peter felt suddenly brave and adventurous. Susan felt as if some delicious smell or some delightful strain of music had just floated by. And Lucy got the feeling you have when you wake up in the morning and realize that it is the beginning of the holidays, or the beginning of summer. So you're meeting Aslan. Is it safe? It's not the first word you use to describe meeting a lion, is it? Is it safe? But it is good. Later on, Lewis tells you about a poem that was recited in Narnia, all about Aslan. Wrong will be right when Aslan comes in sight. At the sound of his roar, sorrows will be no more. When he bares his teeth, winter meets its death. And when he shakes his mane, we shall have spring again. Notice the two couplets. On one side of them, there is Aslan coming in sight, roaring, baring his teeth, shaking his mane. Is he safe? Gosh, might not be the first adjective you use to describe him. But in his ferocious love, there is healing, there is redemption. Mr. Beaver says, "You'll understand when you meet him." "But shall we see him?" asked Susan. "Why, Door of Eve, that's what I brought you here for. I'm to lead you where you shall meet him," said Mr. Beaver. "Is he a man?" asked Lucy. "As that, a man?" said Mr. Beaver sternly. "Certainly not. I tell you, he's the king. He's the king of the wood and the son of the great emperor beyond the sea. Don't you know who is the king of the beasts? And his name is a lion. He's the lion, the great lion." "Ooh," said Susan. "I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion." "That you will, dearie, and no mistake," said Mr. Beaver. "If there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either braver than most or it's just silly." "Then he isn't safe?" said Lucy. "Safe?" said Mr. Beaver. "Don't you hear what I said? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe. But he's good. He's the king, I tell you." I think Lewis captures that, doesn't he? Is he safe? He's much better than safe. Much better than safe. Now, Jesus is constantly telling stories about how the world is dangerous. He tells this famous story about there's the wise man who built his house upon the rock, and there's the foolish man who built his house on the sand. And when the storm hit, the house that had looked so elegant and large and expansive, though it was looking amazing, it was built on sand and it fell to the ground with a great crash. What are we meant to do? We're meant to build our house on the rock, on Jesus himself. He is the safe place, and we will be kept safe through the storm. So safety is a concern that Jesus has, but Jesus wants you to know the world is not safe. And trusting yourself is not safe. When I look back at my life, the person who sabotaged my happiness better than anyone else is me. The person who sabotaged my happiness, my success in life better than anyone else is me. Why would I trust me more than I trust Jesus? Jesus is trustworthy, but is the first way we describe him safe? Let's turn quickly to chapter 11 of John's Gospel. It's on page 62 of this. And can someone tell me how much longer do I have before questions? 7 minutes? 5 minutes. We can do it in 5 minutes. Okay. John 11, famous moment where Jesus, who, if you were here on Tuesday, he is the Word of the Father, the exact representation of God, is the communication of God. Here is what God looks like showing up on planet Earth. And in this story, Jesus shows up at a funeral late. And you think, is he safe? Can I trust him? So big 11 means chapter 11, on page 62 of these ones. Now a man named Lazarus is ill. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay ill, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sister sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is ill." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This illness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Doesn't it infuriate you? Are you infuriated by verse 6? And especially that little word, "so." Coming after verse 5. So Jesus, he loves both sisters. He loves their little brother Lazarus. Lazarus is on the point of death. He loves them all, okay? Jesus is love covered over in flesh. So he delays and he waits. And the nightmare scenario eventuates, right? Lazarus does indeed die. And you think, wow, he loves them, so he allows them to go through harm. So he allows them to experience death even for Lazarus and grief for the sisters. Can we put those two things together? He loves and he allows us to go through great darkness, great harm, great grief. Would that be true? Well, turn over the page and we'll see what happens when Jesus shows up at the funeral. He should have come to heal. That's what they wanted him to do. He should have come to heal. Instead, he comes to the funeral and he's late. Verse 17 on page 64. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now, Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that now, even now, God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection of the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God who is to come into the world. So here's Martha, she comes to Jesus. She's been let down by Jesus. Is it safe to meet Jesus? She has a very good request. And Jesus is powerful enough to grant her request. Will you heal my brother? And he doesn't do it. Is it still safe to meet Jesus? Is it still good to meet Jesus? And when he shows up, he gives her what she needs in that moment. He gives her that truth, the truth of resurrection. See, Jesus doesn't come to repair the world, he comes to raise up the world. If he came to repair the world, then he'd just come to Lazarus and he'd bring him back from sickness. But he hasn't come to repair the world, he's come to resurrect the world. You know what that means? It means we actually have to go down into death. And then he raises us up from there. Right? In all our relationships, if you get let down a little bit, you think, well, at any moment now, the other person is going to make good, right? And it's the same with Jesus. You think, okay, Jesus has allowed me to descend into this grief, or this pain, or this struggle, or this ordeal, but he's not going to let me go deeper than this, is he? Or more painful than this, or darker than here. Sure, he's going to turn it around any moment, right? Jesus will swoop in on a white horse, and he'll say that, right, he's not going to let me go down here, even the grave. And Jesus lets Lazarus go right to the grave before raising him up, because Jesus doesn't come to be the repairer. He comes to be the resurrection. Which means following him will lead you into ordeals and trials and struggle and darkness that will sometimes bewilder and baffle you. But can you trust him? When he comes to you and he says, I am the resurrection and the life. I will turn all things for good, even this. Do you trust me? And it might not feel completely safe. But can you trust me? Martha could. And then Mary, verse 28, after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and he's asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in their house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He said over the page. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. And the Jews said, see how he loved him. It's an amazing story. God shows up to a funeral late, and then he outcries every other Middle Eastern mourner, which is some going, right? Then there may have been professional mourners there. God shows up to the funeral late, and he outcries everybody else, so much that everyone's like, oh wow, he's a blubbering mess. God shows up to a funeral late and outcries everybody. Is he safe? I don't know. Yeah. Is he good? He is so good. He will let us go down and down and down into dark pits. And then meet us there. And then this same tear-stained Saviour is the same one who in verse 44, in a loud voice, he cries out, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man comes out. And finally, there's the turnaround. Finally, there's the redemption. Finally, there's the good catastrophe that brings about a happily ever after, but he lets you go down and down and down and down. Jesus, well, is he safe? Oh, he's so good. He's so trustworthy. And this is what love demands of us. Love demands of us that we trust and entrust ourselves. I'm just going to finish with this C.S. Lewis quote because I think it so beautifully summarizes everything I'm saying here. In The Four Loves, C.S. Lewis wrote, "There is no safe investment. To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping your heart intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even to an animal. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. The alternative to tragedy, or at least to the risk of tragedy, is damnation. The only place outside heaven where you can be perfectly safe from all the dangers and perturbations of love is hell." That'll do me for now. What questions do people have?
Fantastic. Question time. There you go. Thank you so much, Glenn. Before we have a few minutes for Q&A, we're just going to pause and ask you to scan this QR code that will take you to a response card for our meeting today. We'd love for everyone to leave a comment, even if it's totally anonymous. But if you would like to take things a bit further and find out more about the other activities we do in the EU, then leave your name and contact details, and we'd love to help you get in.
Okay, well, hopefully you have a little time to open up that QR code, but we will now move into a time of Q&A. So we have a few minutes available to ask some questions of Glen. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and we will have a roaming microphone.
Jesus was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. Why did he weep?
Great question. Yeah, because it's only within a matter of minutes, I guess, between the tears streaming down his face, and then he says, "Lazarus, come out," and it's a barbecue. Hey, and he turns a funeral into like a celebration. The word that's used, I think it's verse 35, when it says "deeply troubled in spirit." It's a word that expresses deep anger. It's almost like he's snorting with indignation at death. And I think what he's being confronted with in the funeral of Lazarus is precisely the reason he's come to earth, to overturn the curse of death. Here is winter without Christmas. And here he is confronted with the evil of death and the havoc that it wreaks not only with Lazarus' family, but with all the families of the world. And I think that weeping in that moment is a token of all of that. And I think it's not just a one-off. The book of Isaiah in the Old Testament says, "In all our affliction, the Lord too is afflicted." So it's not the first time Jesus has cried. Jesus cries and weeps without tears.
Is there a difference between the resurrection when they would die and the resurrection that Martha was referring to
Yes.
on the last day? And what is the difference between the two?
Very good, very good. So what we're seeing is a kind of a pencil sketch of what resurrection will be, because Lazarus, poor guy, has to die twice. Sorry about that, Lazarus, but hope the barbecue was worth it. But Lazarus, he's in one sense he's resuscitated, isn't he, in order to die again. But within a matter of weeks of this event, Jesus himself goes through death and comes out the other side into an immortal life, never to die again. And that's the kind of life he wants to invite all of us into, including Lazarus and Mary and Martha and everybody here, a kind of a deathless immortality. So the Lazarus raising is a portent of that. It's a little pencil sketch of that. What Jesus wants to do is not just dip a toe in death and come back out. It's more like go through death and come out the other side and say, come join me on the other side of death.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Glenn. You noted aspects of the song of Jesus that most people would agree are good, and you noted that sometimes we sing off key. Some people might argue that aspects of the song are dangerous. For example, the church's teaching on gender and sexuality. What would you say to people on that?
Actually, one thing I didn't mention when I talked about the Roman Empire was the effects that the sexual revolution of Jesus had. I mentioned one aspect of it. So the outlawing of pederasty, child sexual abuse, was one aspect of the teaching of Jesus. But if you read work like Kyle Harper's From Shame to Sin, he's just an ancient historian about the Roman period and talking about what a fundamental shift we went through when, in a Roman Empire, somebody like a Harvey Weinstein would be considered a senator. It would just be business as usual. And let's be honest, like as a producer, Harvey Weinstein was kind of top of the heap, and we didn't question him for so long. But the idea that what he did was wrong is non-obvious to other cultures down through history, including the Roman Empire. And I would say that first century revolution was about the equalization of the sexes, such that women had always been expected to be virgins on their wedding night and utterly chaste. And then Jesus comes along and says, oh yeah, and men too, right? And so men were to be as restricted in their sexuality as women had always been expected to be. It was a great equalization of the sexes. And Jesus basically in Matthew chapter 19, if you want to look at it later, he basically says, okay, marriage is one man and one woman for life. The doors are locked. No one gets out of this thing alive. And if you don't like that, there's this other thing called chaste singleness, right? And that was so revolutionary, even to Jesus' hearers. Like, even people who've been following him start saying, oh, if this is the case, it's better not to marry, right? And some of those disciples weren't married, so I don't know what kind of conversation they had with their wives later on. But it's an incredibly, you could say in one sense, restricted vision for sexuality, sex belonging in that one place. But I think if you read a book like Kyle Harper's From Shame to Sin, or Joseph Henry, neither of these people are Christians, the weirdest people in the world, talking about how the peculiarity and the prosperity of the Jesus Revolution was kind of down to the marriage and family program about that. Now that leads on to all sorts of clashes with the modern sexual revolution. And the modern sexual revolution of the 1960s basically says, we're going to equalize the sexes in the other direction, okay? So now it's through the technology of the pill and other things, so women can be as liberated as men have always been. And I think we are living in the modern West with two different sexual revolutions in our minds, and there's a kind of a clash between those two. And I would urge you can read non-Christian writers about it, non-Christian historians and evolutionary biologists, that's who Kyle Harper is and Joseph Henry, or you can read Jesus himself. And I would just ask you to figure out whether the first sexual revolution has led to more liberation, more progress, more freedom, more love than the 1960s sexual revolution. That's a topic for a whole other discussion, but I've just opened the can of worms and enjoy.
Well, this is all the time we have today. There's plenty more to come in the next week. For those who are wanting to find out more, a great way would be to read the Gospel of John with a Christian friend to help you understand it. And don't forget that we still have more Meet Jesus events coming up next week. And right now, we would love if you could join us for lunch afterwards, just outside, and it's free.